snails and thunderstorms. That's what love feels like for the avoidant. A paradox. On the one hand, slow, oh, glacially slow, armored, cautious, delicate. And on the other, electric and sudden, like a sky that's been silent for days and then roars. That's the rhythm of their heart. Retreat and rumble, retreat and rumble. And so we begin. 7 hidden signs an avoidant is falling in love with you. Now there's a title, isn't it? Tempting, like a key left beside a locked door. Everyone wants the signs, the secret signals, the gestures that don't look like gestures. Because if you've ever loved an avoidant, and I suspect, if you're still listening you have, then you know this truth. They rarely say it outright. You won't get roses and declarations at sunset. You won't hear "I love you" in a thunderous speech. But you might hear it when they ask if you've eaten, or when they remember your dog's birthday. You might not hear it with ears, but feel it in the space they once guarded like a fortress, space they're suddenly letting you into. You see, the avoidant doesn't fall in love the way others do. They tiptoe into it. They sneak up on it sideways, pretend they're not looking it in the eye. They don't leap. They glance, hesitate, calculate, and then maybe, just maybe, they inch forward. And when they do, the signs are so subtle, so damn easy to miss. You could blink and mistake it for a breeze. But if you know what to look for, if you really know, you'll see that love, for the avoidant, is less a loud trumpet and more a secret garden. Overgrown, yes, but blooming. Let me take you to a story. There was once a man named Theo, a Frenchman, Paris-born, sharp in both tongue and appearance. Theo was the kind of man who believed in solitude the way monks believe in silence. He lived alone in an apartment filled with black and white photographs and dusty records. He said little, felt deeply, but hid all of it behind polished smiles and clever distractions. And then came Marta, a violinist, Czech, hair like autumn leaves, eyes like winter rivers. She didn't chase him, didn't plead or press. She simply was, and her being did something strange to Theo. At first he pulled away, cancelled plans, took longer to reply. Classic retreat. But something began to shift. One evening she mentioned her mother's surgery, just in passing. She didn't dwell, didn't cry. But 2 days later, Theo sent her a small, handwritten note. Not a text, a note, folded neatly, tucked in an envelope, slipped under her door. It read, "If you need to sit silently, I'm here. I don't need to understand. I only need to be near." That, my dear friend, was sign number 1. They begin to show up, quietly. No fanfare, no announcement. But suddenly, they're there, present. Not in words, but in presence. They will not overwhelm. They won't declare, but they will be there. And for the avoidant, that's massive. You see, showing up means vulnerability. It means risking being seen. And for someone who's made a life out of hiding, that's not small. That's a revolution. Then there's sign number 2, and it's a curious thing. They begin to let you see the mess. Avoidants are curators of control. Their lives often look meticulously arranged. Their calendar, their apartment, their expressions, all just tidy enough to keep you from peeking behind the curtain. But love disrupts that. When an avoidant starts falling, they begin to let things slip. Not by accident, but by courage. I once knew a woman named Isolde from Galway, red-haired, fond of old poetry and long walks in the rain. She'd spent years perfecting the art of being unapproachable, brilliant in her work, untouchable in her emotions. But then she met Alexei, a quiet literature professor from Krakow, all tweed and kindness. One day, he arrived unannounced to bring her lunch. She didn't answer the door immediately. When she finally did, her eyes were puffy, makeup smudged, tears dried but visible. And instead of pretending, instead of deflecting or shutting him out, she just said, "It's a bad day. Would you still like to stay?" That was it. No explanation, no apology. And he did stay, quietly, on the floor, reading while she napped. When an avoidant lets you see them not at their best, but in their truth, that's a sign louder than any "I love you." Sign 3. They begin to ask strange questions. Not overt, not poetic, but questions like, "What time do you usually go to bed?" Or, "Have you ever wanted to live somewhere else?" These seem benign, even boring. But what they're really asking is, "Can I picture you in my life? Long term?" Avoidants don't imagine a future easily. To do so is to invite expectation, and expectation feels like a trap. But love makes them brave, curious. So when they ask these odd little questions, take notice. They're beginning to place you into the architecture of their life, into the blueprint, not just as a guest, but as a potential resident. Now let me tell you about Henrik, tall Swede, part-time watchmaker, full-time enigma. Stoic doesn't even cover it. For 3 years he'd lived in the same flat, alone, bare walls, a single chair, no plants, no pictures. His motto was, "Nothing that requires maintenance." Then came Lena, a Catalan painter, joyful and infuriating in equal measure. She had the audacity to smile at his silences, and one day, over tea, she mentioned how cold his flat felt. She said it with a smirk, not a criticism. 2 weeks later, he asked, "What kind of plant wouldn't die easily?" That was sign 4. They begin to soften their space for you. Not just physical space, emotional, conversational, existential. They start adding chairs to rooms that once only seated one. They begin to leave room for you, in the closet, in the calendar, in the daydreams. It's subtle, it's slow, but it's real. And then there's sign 5. My favorite. They become jealous, but polite about it. Avoidants are masters of control, even when it comes to jealousy. They won't throw scenes or make accusations. But oh, they notice. They'll remember the name of the person you mentioned in passing. They'll suddenly have an opinion about your co-worker's Instagram. Their humor becomes sharper, tinged with a strange intensity. But instead of saying, "I'm jealous," they might say, "He seems to enjoy your company quite a bit, doesn't he?" With a little smile that tries, and fails, to hide the tightness in their chest. That jealousy isn't possession, it's vulnerability. It's their heart whispering, "You matter to me, and I'm terrified you don't realize how much." Now, I'll warn you, this one is tricky, because avoidants, even in love, don't want to be owned. And they won't try to own you, but they will ache quietly at the thought of losing you. And if you watch closely, you'll see it. In the pause before they speak, the way they fidget, the questions they don't quite ask. Sign 6. They open the vault. Not all at once, not dramatically, but you'll notice. A story from their childhood, a scar they've never shown anyone, a confession tucked between jokes. Avoidants treat their past like a locked drawer, but love makes the key tremble in their hands. And if they trust you, if they love you, they'll start unlocking the smallest drawers first. And it won't look like a grand reveal. It'll sound like, "I used to be afraid of thunderstorms when I was a boy," or "I hated birthdays for a long time." These are not casual stories. These are whispers from the soul. And if you're quiet enough to hear them, that's when you know And finally, sign 7. They stop running. The avoidant, when triggered, runs. Emotionally, physically, conversationally. They vanish. Not to hurt you, but to survive. To regulate. But when they're falling in love, deeply, madly, uncontrollably, they start to stay. They sit with discomfort. They return your calls faster. They reply to texts, even when it's hard. They might not always say the right thing, but they stay. Staying is the loudest "I love you" they've got. I once asked a man, Lucas, a baker from Vienna, who hadn't spoken to his father in 20 years, why he stayed in a relationship with a woman who challenged him every day. He looked at me, dusted flour off his hands, and said, "Because when she sees the parts I want to hide, she doesn't flinch. So I stop running. For the first time, I want to be caught." That's it, really. That's the miracle of the avoidant in love. They don't shout it, they show it. They stay. Not because they've conquered all their fears, but because you have become more important than their escape route. So if you're watching someone who withdraws, who hesitates, who flinches at closeness, but also shows up, reveals little truths, lets you into their solitude, cherish that. Because they're not just falling in love, they're learning how. And in that learning, they're trusting you to see them not as broken, but as becoming. Isn't that the greatest act of love of all? To offer not the finished sculpture, but the hands, the chisel, and the stone. So watch the hands. Watch the space they leave for you. And most of all, watch where they stop running. That's where love lives. Quietly, fiercely, and often, forever.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.